Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Charlotte from South North. I'm based as part of the Voices for Just Climate Action Alliance. We're going to get started in just a minute. I'm sure a few more people will keep joining us. That's okay. I'm just here to give you a quick welcome before we kick off. So some of you in the chat and in the participants, I can see I already know are part of our VCA Alliance. But if you are new to the VCA and engaging with us, we are a network of an alliance of over 200 local civil society actors who are based in 7 different countries in the Global South. If you go to the next slide, please, Karen. You'll see this is roughly where we are, and a lot of our partners are focused on locally led climate action in those contexts, in those regions. But as an alliance, we also have an objective to support Global South voices to be heard within global spaces. So that's what we're hoping to do today, is to strengthen our collective capacity to engage at the global level for locally led climate action. We have a very small global team that every year we try and meet and strengthen our collective capacity to engage at the global level, which can be a very difficult and very tricky space to navigate. Some of our partners are already doing that. They're already experts that have been involved in the UNFCCC for many years, but for many of us, it's a new space. It's a space we're still trying to navigate and understand. And so we wanted to create this year a training, a series of sessions for us to delve a bit deeper into what is this global space of the UNFCCC and its COPs in particular, what opportunities are there, and what are the challenges for us as civil society, particularly based in the Global South. So we're hoping this is a chance for you to learn from some other civil society experiences and strengthen your own advocacy plans and objectives that you want to achieve in this kind of space. Yeah, that's about it for me and my team. I hope it's going to be very fruitful and a great learning experience. Oh yeah, so we as VCA, we're a big network. Here are some photos of us at some previous COPs with some of our previous engagements, and we're really happy to be bringing together some broader civil society networks to learn from each other. Yeah, and with that, I'm going to hand over to Marina to take us through what you'll be doing in the session, in the next 4 sessions. Oh, sorry, before I do that, completely forgot, some small housekeeping is please rename yourself with your name and your organization. You will be muted at the moment. If you want to unmute when we get to the Q&A section, please just raise your hand and we will give you permission to speak. Otherwise, please use the Q&A chat box to ask your question. If you have a comment, please drop it in the chat box. Yeah, next slide. We have interpretation today, which we're very grateful for our interpreters making this possible for us today to speak in English, Spanish, Brazilian Portuguese, French, and Indonesia Bahasa. So when you do speak, please feel free to speak in any of those languages. Please do speak clearly and slowly as much as you can to allow interpreters to do the best work that they can. And if you are joining and you're an English speaker and you're listening to me now, please just a reminder to still make sure you are in the English channel that you can hear everybody else. If you have any Zoom technical support requirements, you can message the host or info@southnorth.org. Great, thank you so much. And with that, over to you, Marina. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And welcome to our training on global climate advocacy. I'm Marina Naves. I'm based in Brazil, and I'm one of the founders of Interface Advocacy. So the mission of our organization is to give visibility to empower advocacy initiatives dedicated to sustainability. So for me, it's a huge pleasure to be here with you all. I'm changing here to see all of your faces. It's a true honor to be in a room full of activists that will defend the interests of humanity and future generations at COP29 and COP30. Before I present the structure of our training, I'd like to ask Marina and Gustavo, my partners on this training, to introduce themselves.
So, hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys. I am Marina as well, Marina Esteves. I'm based in Brazil at São Paulo, and I'll be conducting the first and the second workshop with you. So I'm really excited. I'll introduce myself in my presentation, but I am a social scientist and anthropologist. I work with environmental advocacy has been some time. So I'm happy to share some of my insights and my point of view with you, and I'll be glad to hear back from you. What are your experiences, and we can talk about it at the end of the session. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Charlotte. Everyone from VCA. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you, Marina. My name is Gustavo. I'm also based in Brazil. I'm in São Paulo. I'm a partner of advocacy, of interface advocacy. I'm an expert on public affairs and government relations. It's a pleasure also to be here with such a diverse audience today. And I'll be providing support throughout this workshop, and I'll be glad to help you out with any questions, comments, or doubts that you have. And that's it. I wish you all a great session today.
Thank you both. I'd like to present one slide. Let me see if because there is one slide being okay. Can you see my slide? Yes, perfect.
Yes.
So we have designed a training based on your, the responses from the survey we circulated with the registration form. It's a brief but very powerful training, very intense. We hope you can join us online so that we can interact and you can make questions. But if you can't, you can obviously watch it later on. There will be the recordings. So there will be 4 sessions, one today, another on Wednesday, another next Tuesday, and the 4th workshop will happen on October 29th, also a Tuesday. So today, Marina Esteves is going to cover the foundations of climate diplomacy. So she'll talk about the UNFCCC, structure, landscape, its members. She'll comment about the Paris Agreement and what is being negotiating at COP29. On Wednesday, we're going to discuss how to navigate the COP arena. So how does the event works, the logistics, how civil society can engage, the opportunities for engagement on COP29. And you'll also be able to discuss a case study of a well-succeeded intervention from a civil society group during COP. On the 3rd workshop, Gustavo and we have worked in a large number of advocacy and lobby projects and initiatives. So we have basically summarized everything we have learned on these 2 sessions. So on the 3rd workshop, we're going to talk about the advocacy and lobby, the concepts, the strategies, different modalities, and how to negotiate on this when you're doing lobby and advocacy. And in the 4th workshop, we're going to present a toolkit to support organizations advance their advocacy goals. We introduce you a very brief but very powerful advocacy plan template to get you guys prepared to hit the ground running at COP29 and COP30. So we introduce the template, and while we also explain how to use the advocacy tools. And as a bonus, we have left 10 organizations will be able to receive a 1-hour mentoring session to review the advocacy plan, to clarify doubts, and make sure you have a powerful plan, to put in place at COP29 and COP30. So we'll not discuss the bonus right now. We'll discuss it on the 3rd workshop. So we hope to see you, as many of you as possible. It's always at 3 p.m. CET. So this is the structure of our training. Let me know if you have questions about this. And if not, you have comments, questions about the structure of the training? If not, I'll hand over to Marina Esteves, and you guys can always stop us and make your questions. So thank you all for being here, and let's start the first workshop.
Perfect. Just unmuting myself. So, hello everyone. Such a great thing to be here with you guys. I know the VCA initiative for many years now, so I'm really glad to finally be part of it. So, feel free to ask me any questions. My intent here, as Marina already said, is to go through the foundations of climate diplomacy. So once you are at COP, you understand what is being talked about, what is being issued. So, for example, if you go to the plenary, you understand what they are talking about. We'll go through the structure of the UNFCCCs, the brief history and the main COPs that we had with the main decisions. We also today will go through the Paris Agreement. So I'll show you some of the main articles and what they talk about, so you can easily navigate through COP and understand what everyone is discussing, and so you can plan your advocacy and you can plan your communication based on what is being put on the table. So I have here a warm-up. So this is our agenda. I will share with you guys a link and a QR code so you can vote for which topic interests you the most. So we already had the welcoming, the introduction, and now we are at the warm-up. After that, we'll have passed through UNFCCC structure and history. We'll talk about the parties, constituencies, and observers, so you can be more informed on how participate and which are the actors that have space in the COP, how we can circulate, etc. And we'll end today's workshop with the Paris Agreement. The next workshop will be talking about more practical things, so how to get around at the COP map, for example, which zones are more prone to advocacy, which zones are more prone to be able to communicate, to talk, and to place your advocacy strategy. And the next training, we are also going to talk about what is expected to COP29 and what is expected to COP30, that, as you guys may already know, will be held here in Brazil. So we are really excited with this opportunity. So here I share the QR code to vote on which topic you find more interesting. We have also the link I'll share here in the chat. Just a moment. Okay, now you can find the link in the chat. Okay, the headphone.
Oh, now Marina, we've lost your audio.
Hello, hello.
That's good. Yes.
That's good. That's good. Okay, so I'll keep writing like this. So okay, if you can vote here in the Menti, I'll share another screen for you to see which topic will be more interesting to you guys. So here, so we have more interesting now on the Paris Agreement and party constituencies and observers. That's great because this will say how much time should I spend in each topic. So feel free to vote. Now we have more like 50-50. Just for you to know, this link and this QR code also gives you the opportunity to place questions and answers. So we have here a system. If you pass through the next page, you can see question and answers. And the last slide here on Menti is supposed to grab your interest on the next workshop. So feel free to navigate the Menti and we'll be keeping updated here in our presentation. So, okay, now I see there is more interest in parties, constituents, and observers and less interest in the UNFCCC structure and history. So perfect, this was already a great start, so I can place more time and attention on what you guys want to hear the most. So, okay, let's go. So like I was saying, my name is Marina. I am a social scientist. I'm an anthropologist. I study environmental policy and economics at the University of São Paulo, as well as the Foundation, Getúlio Vargas Foundation. So it is a great place to discuss science and discuss participation. And I want to hear a little bit about you guys. This is not an official part of the presentation, but you feel free to share with me and with Marina, my partner, and Gustavo as well. This is a way for us to getting to know you. So where are you speaking from? Where are you from? What is your gender? What is your age range? And what is your main objective with advocacy? I'll share as well the link of the survey here at the chat so we can get to know you better. So feel free to share these responses with us. We will not share with anyone. It's just for our interest to get to know better our audience. So welcoming already done, or the warm-up already done, so we can start with the UNFCCC's structure. So this is a picture I took last year at Dubai. This was a newly and great space that we had here in Brazil. The Brazilian government offered few moments to discuss with diplomats how the civil society thought it was best conducted in the negotiations. So here it's me participating in that moment, so we could ask some questions and understand the strategy better of the diplomats. I don't know if other countries intend to do that or already do that, and Brazil is the least one to contemplate this type of participation. But it was a really great moment, and it was really important for communicating and advocacy certain thematics. So let's go to the UNFCCC's structure. First, what is a COP? I know that's really basic, many of you may already know, but we can define the COP as the Conference of the Parties. This is an annual meeting of the convention, and the COP is also the supreme decision-making of the convention. So our question must be, so what is the convention, right? So if the COP responds to the convention, what is the convention? And the convention is known as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. So the UNFCCC operates a global framework for countries to cooperate on climate action, including mitigation, adaptation, finance, and technology transfer, with the background of issuing the climate crisis onto an end, right? This is our main goal. The convention has now 198 members or countries that are signatory to the convention. So when we say when we say the convention, we are referring to the UNFCCC. In other words, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So we have now to dive in and UNFCCC. So what is the convention? What it does? As I said, UNFCCC has the main objective of stabilizing greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. It is structured in 4 main points. The first one with broad principles, like what are the main focus, what are the modes of participation. The broad principles also bring a list of methodology approaches. So if you want to dive in a little bit more on UNFCCC. The second point is the general obligation. So every signatory of the convention must follow a strict pattern of reporting the climate change governing in each country. So there are some responsibilities in order to be signed on the convention. The third point is the basic institutional arrangements. So it's self-explanatory here, this point, I think. And the fourth is the intergovernmental process, so diplomacy. This is a picture of a group photo of the world leaders meeting at the Earth Summit in Rio, Brazil in 1992. We'll talk a little bit about the Earth Summit in a while, but it was the first moment, the first meeting of what later would become the UNFCCC. So this was the moment that global leaders decided that climate change would be needing an extent and more accurate dedication to be solved. So let's continue on. Feel free to ask me any questions in the chat. I'll try to be as slow as I can so I can pass the idea. The idea here is not to sign many names or many things, it's just to place the actors and the players in the map. So once you know what they're talking about, who are they, you can plan your advocacy plan way better to be active at COP. So we talked about the origin of the UNFCCC and what is the convention, what is the COP, and now we dive a little bit more. You'll see that will be each slide will be diving a little bit more. So don't feel bad if it gets a little full with names. We can address this individually. No issues if you have any doubts. So now we are going to the governing and subsidiary bodies. So what are they? We already talked about the COP. So the COP is the meeting of the parties of the convention. So the COP reunites the parties linked with the UNFCCC's convention. So once your country is a signatory of the UNFCCC, you participate at COP. You are invited to have a seat at COP. We also have another governing body of the UNFCCC structure is the CMP. That is the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol. So the CMP, it also meets annually at COPs, but it also has other agendas. So the CMP also meets in June at Bonn. Usually it happens like that. So they have two biannually, so two encounters at year, as well as at the same time COP is only one. So the COP holds the CMP annually. After the Kyoto Protocol went obsolete, if we can say that, it has still really large relevance, but the Paris Agreement made some fundamental substitutions on the Kyoto Protocol structures. But now we have also the CMA, so the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the Paris Agreement that serve as the CMP to monitor and to follow and to assess the goals made by parties on the Paris Agreement. So when we talk about governing bodies, we are talking about these three main groups: the COP, the CMP, and the CMA. So if you go to COP 29 now, you'll see that there are parallel meetings of the CMP, the CMA, and the COP. There are different thematics as well listed on each one of those groups. So you already know now if you see this in the billboards or in the televisions indicating the rooms that these discussions will be happening. But we have here the Bureau. The Bureau is the office that supports the work of the governing bodies through the provision of advice, guidance regarding the ongoing work under the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. So the Bureau makes the work go on, right? So they keep the agenda, they invite, they call, they structure the event. So the Bureau of the COP, CMP, CMA, sorry, it's a really important structure thing of the COP. But we also have, these are the governing bodies, but we also have the subsidiary bodies that gives advice to these governing bodies. So what are they? We have the first one is the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice that is called the SBSTA. It assists the governing bodies through the provision of timely information and advice on scientific and technological matters as they relate to the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. So the SBSTA also meets biannually at COPs and at SBs, the subsidiary bodies encounters that happens every June in Bonn. which is the city that hosts the UNFCCC Bureau. And we also have the subsidiary body of implementation. It assists the governing bodies in review and implementation of the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. So these two subsidiary bodies, they are conducted by the Secretariat, the UNFCCC Secretariat, that provides organization, support, and technical expertise to the UNFCCC negotiation and institutions, and facilitates the flows of authoritative information, implementation, etc. So the Secretariat is related to the subsidiary bodies. Okay, so now we had the convention, the COP, the governing bodies with the CMA and the CMP, and the subsidiary bodies. So this is the structure of the COP, and now we are going to see some on-point governing and constituencies that happen. We'll talk about it. So let's keep in mind that this is the principal structure of the COP. What about the constituted bodies? So the constituted bodies, I have here a definition for you. Just a second. Okay, so the constituted bodies, they are the many decisions taken by the governing bodies, so COP, CMA, CMP, and they also meet annually with annual sessions to establish a number of institutional arrangements and specialized bodies with limited membership, often referred to constituted bodies, to support bodies and the intergovernmental process. So the constituted bodies, they exist when CMA, CMP, and COP think they need more discussions on certain topics. So here we have some examples of constituted bodies that address specific and thematic and on-point discussion. So for example, we have the Adaptation Committee that meets annually at COPs as well. The memberships, they are defined by the governing bodies. So it might have the participation of social society, civil social society, governments, subnational governments, cities, states, for example. So here is a more broad space of participation, and it depends on the topic they will be discussing. For example, we have the Adaptation Committee, as I said. We have the Article 6.4 supervisory body. So this is an interesting point, because once we talk about the Paris Agreement will be important. Why is it important to know which articles of the Paris Agreement will be discussed in which one of the bodies or the constituted bodies, so we can navigate the COP better? So what is the 6.4, for example, and why is this so important to negotiations? As that important that it needed to have a constituted body to discuss this specifically. So, for example, here we have a form of participation that intends to be more detailed on each topic. So here I have some examples. I didn't put all of constituted bodies, there are more, but I share with you the link as well. So if you have interest in knowing how to participate, how to be present at COP in some constituted bodies, feel free to consult the UNFCCC's website. So keeping on, so we have the constituted bodies, the subsidiary bodies, and now we have the constituted bodies that are only called when certain topics deserve more detailed information. So now we enter the zone of observers' participation. I think maybe this will be of more interest of everyone here in the group. Once the observer organizations, they are most in majority, they're made of social and civil societies social movements, and other types of participation that they're not related to any government or to the UNFCCC's system. So we have three modes of observer organizations. We'll go through the first one here. The first mode of participation as an observer is if you are a United Nations system or a specialized agency. So what is this? Now, in the UN system, we have the groups, the main groups, for example, the General Assembly or the Security Council. and others, just for example, the International Court of Justice, the Economic and Social Council, for example. So these people who work on this on the UN system, they are invited to COP as well. They have to solicit accreditation. So here, to be an observer, you have to make the UNFCCC's step by step to having a badge. And once you have a badge, you can annually apply to all UNFCCC's events. So we'll get there. I'll share with you some of my experience, because I used to work on an NGO that had the UNFCCC's badges, and then each year we made a solicitation on the process, and we were contemplated with some credentials that we share with our partners, for example. So if you want to be accredited, you have to follow step by step UNFCCC's accreditation system. So, okay, we have the UN system, we have the UN programs and funds such as UNICEF, UNDP, for example. They are all in this first category of observer organizations. And we have also the specialized agencies such as the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, UNESCO, and others. Here are just some examples. The second category of observer organizations are the intergovernmental organizations, or the IGOs. I think we might not be in this category here in the group, but the intergovernmental organizations, they are entities created by treaties or agreements between sovereign states to work together on common issues and to serve as a platform for international cooperation on topics like peace, security, trade, human rights, environment, and development. Some of the IGOs example, we have also the World Health Organization, but we have the International Monetary Fund. We have also regional IGOs such as the European Union or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, for example. And we have also issue-specific IGOs, as you can see here in the example. But what interests us the most here is the third observer category, that is the non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and constituencies. So here I'll share with you guys, for example, we have these types of constituencies. So what is a constituency? The constituency, it is the form of a grouping the NGOs and the UNFCCC's process. So they are organized in these loose groups with broadly aligned interests. So here is a way of grouping different kinds of organizations that want to be part of the UNFCCC's discussions, dialogues, conventions, encounters, meetings, so on. So we have here the types of constituencies that once you apply as an NGO to the UNFCCC systems, you have to indicate which constituency your organization is more aligned to. For example, the one that I used to work with was a business and industry NGO. So it was a bingo. It was a non-governmental organization, an NGO that was able to discuss and dialogue with business into achieving a more ambitious path for the climate change resolution. So I was situated here in the bingo, business and industry NGOs, but we have more. We have the ENGO, the environmental organizations that are the majority part of the NGO participation at COP. Here I bring just an example for you. We have, this is the total volume of participations of ENGOs, so environmental national non-governmental organizations, and we have two smaller part of this NGO majority of participation. We have now the Climate Action Network, so the NGO CAN, and the ENGO DCJ, the Campaign to Demand for Climate Justice. So I want to highlight here how the constituencies, they also reflect years and years of communication and advocacy strategies. So once a category here is placed as a constituency, it demonstrates the result, the successful result of advocacy campaigns. For example, we have here the campaign to demand climate justice. For example, there is a really new NGO category at the UNFCCC, and we have here, for example, that the climate justice NGO represents just a little bit of the NGO constituency breakdown. So, for example, if your organization is not accredited yet at the UNFCCC system, and you work, for example, with Climate Action Network or demanding climate justice, I think you will have more, you have like a more easy path to gain your accreditation in your observer status, since these categories are being they're being stimulated and they're being asked for to be more participant at COP. We also have other types of participation, such as the farmers and the IPO, Indigenous People Organization. And I have to be honest with you guys here. The IPO, it is a historical category here, the constituencies, but I was searching for the categories now at COP29, and I couldn't find in the guidebook, the guidelines of participation in COP29, the reference on IPO. I might be wrong, I hope so, but I don't know if they dissolute this category into other categories. I don't know exactly. So if you guys have any information about it, I will be really glad on hearing, because I found it was really strange that the IPO is not there anymore. Might be a typing mistake that they have, I hope so. And we have other types of modes of participation, like the local government and municipal authorities, research and independent NGOs, trade union, women and gender constituencies, and children and youth NGOs. So you can see that, for example, the YOUNGO, the youth and children NGOs, it is a really new constituency here at the UNFCCC's observer. So as I was saying, this we can reach this information as by meaning the successful of advocacy and communication and participation campaigns of the civil society. So, okay, here's the EGO. So we talk about every type of actor here in the UNFCCC and its structure. So if you have any questions so far, if you want to dedicate more attention in one category, if you have any doubts, feel free to ask me. I'm looking here in the chat to see if you have already any questions. If you don't, I'll be going forward. Okay, how do we register our organization into these bodies? So you can, wait, I think I have the link here. Here, the website page here. If you go to UNFCCC's process and meetings, parties and non-party stakeholders, you'll find the link where it explains how can you gain the observer status. Also, in the COP29 guide that was published now by the UNFCCC, it has the step-by-step on how to gain this observer accreditation. I'm talking here about the climate COPs, but the same things that I speak here for climate is also able to be directed to the CBD, so the biodiverse dialogues. So you can, the CBD works exactly the same way. They're the same constituencies, the same process of accreditation, the same process of demanding credentials. Let me see here the Q&A. So the COP16 held in Colombia will present the same structure, so you can make the same process that I said here. Can a small NGO register at the UNFCCC? Yes, it can. I don't know exactly. It has like a rule. For example, NGOs with less than 3 years of existence cannot apply to the UNFCCC's observer status. So you have to have more than 3 years of working, and you have to have references and history. So I think the baseline is 3 years of action, but I don't know, I saw this last year, so I don't know if it had any change for this year, but I don't think so, because this process is really embedded the same way through the years. So you can register, yes, in one of those observer categories, but not if you have less than 3 years of action. Okay. So now
we have other questions, Marina, on the chat.
Okay.
So is the representation of each observer known? There is another, let me start from the beginning. A museum would fit in which?
Okay. So is the representativeness of each observer known? Yes, it is. So when you go to the UNFCCC's website, you have a list of every observer organization and the contact information of the focal point. So I used to be a focal point of my organization, and my email was made public. That is good for one side, but it's not that good for the other side, because the mailing was getting like hacked and we were receiving a lot of emails of unwanted emails. So yes, it is public information, the observers. And it's not easy to assess the observer status. I made several times, I couldn't see. Yes, it's not easy. They ask for several documentations and proof that you've been active and working. So they do like a really diligent work and to see which NGOs are credited. So yes, it is a rough process. Why can I register as individual tend to cop based on my level of expertise? Must I belong to a party or non-party statutory? Yes, that is a thing. For example, you cannot apply for individual batches, you're right, but you can talk, for example, with NGOs that have the observer status and ask for a credential. For example, when I used to work in this NGO, many researchers or people that would be interested in going to COP would ask me for a credential, and each NGO organization will have their rules of distributing credentials. So the rule of my organization was to distribute to people who were part of our year-long process. So these credentials, for you to know, is not they are not up to sell. You cannot buy the credentials legally in UNFCCC. There are NGOs who sell credentials, but this is wrong. And once the UNFCCC finds out that your NGO is selling credentials, you might lose your observer status. So be careful on buying credentials for other NGOs. This is a free exchange. So the intent is to have more participants and not to only reduce the participants that can pay for it. So this is not a good compliance thing for the UNFCCC. Okay, so I'll go on. If you have any other questions, you can put here on the question and answer or the chat. Marina and Gustavo will help me here visualizing anything that might interest you. So, okay, so here we are going to enter a brief history of the convention, like really, really brief, so we can keep the time here. Here's a picture of me at Glasgow at COP26. It was my first COP, so I was really interested on going. I was younger than I am now, so I was really engaged on youth and children movement. So the main message of the Glasgow COP was, we can do this if we act now. So this was like a major shift in the tone of communication, because before the COVID pandemic, the message was call for action. So we changed the call for action to act now. So this was a really substantial different tone in the communication, and this difference of tone was set majorly by social and civil movements and by youth and children movement that said that we have not that much time to think about strategies or to address our strategies. We have to act now if you want to maintain the global and the Paris Agreement goals of emissions well below the 2 degrees Celsius and 1.5 at its best. So it was a major shift in communication that I tend to align this with the advocacy and other social movements that emphasized this timing for the UNFCCC's structure and for the governments that were negotiating. So this was a major shift in the discussions of COP. So we'll talk about only about 4 moments, not 4 COPs, not 4 COPs because the first one was not a COP, it was before COPs even existed. So we are going to talk about the Stockholm of 1992 and the ECO 92 or the Earth Summit that happened on Rio. So you can see there's 2 events, but these 2 events, they were part of a bigger movement of calling for action. At this time, it was really calling for action and to acknowledge the impacts of climate change on every day-to-day life of everyone in the planet. So we'll talk about the ECO 92. After we'll talk about the first COP that was held in Berlin, the COP 3 of Kyoto, and now we're gonna make like a huge jump from the COP 3 to the COP 21 that was held in Paris. So as you might imagine, we had many discussions in between Kyoto and Paris, but unfortunately, I will be not able to address it here. You can find more information here in the website below. You have the UNFCCC's website with all the COPs and all the documents, so you can have like a really spend your time and have a really immersive dive into the decisions of each COP. So unfortunately, I'll be putting focus here just on these ones. So let's go. So for the first one, the Stockholm Conference, or as was best known, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the UNCED. So we had the Stockholm Conference was a major event in international environmental diplomacy, was held in Stockholm, Sweden, and the conference brought together 172 countries. So it is a number that on nowadays number is really large participation. Like we had 172 countries participating each year of COP and sending heads of state. We would be impressed nowadays. So at the time it was a really impressive movement, and it marked an important moment on the evolution of the global environmental governance. So this was really important. And we had also in the same year the ECO 92 on Rio de Janeiro, and was also known as the Earth Summit. So as you can see here with the sets, the same decisions, both discussions held the same conclusions. So in Stockholm and Rio, people were together and they found out that it will be best to found this governmental governance of the climate crisis issue. So in these 2 conferences, we can add them up, and we had the founding of the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC that we've been talking now, and we had also the foundation of the Convention of Biological Diversity, the CBD, and the CBD was established to address the loss of biodiversity globally, and it created an international legal framework for the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, and the fair sharing of benefits arising from the use of genetic resources. We know nowadays the discussion on CBD have developed a lot, but at the time this was the main concern on founding the CBD and the UNFCCC to address the mitigation. So this was the main division. So the UNFCCC would address mitigation, that meaning emissions, so greenhouse gas emissions, and the CBD would be addressing the impacts on biodiversity. As the years were passing, the UNFCCC also added this commitment in its structure. So adaptation, mitigation, and nature-based impacts, for example, and the CBD also looks nowadays for climate. So they are really intricate and they cooperate a lot, the UNFCCC and the CBD. And we also had the Rio Declaration of Environment and Development. That was a really important thing at the time. It was a set of 27 principles aimed to promote sustainable development and stress the importance of economic growth while protecting the environment, and establish environmental protection and economic development, that they should go hand to hand. And some key decisions of the Rio that included the right to development with the respect of environment. So there was the first time that places that development should be aligned with environmental limits. And the polluter pays principle. So if you pollute more, you pay more. Here in Brazil, we have this discussion on taxes. And me and Marina, we worked on an advocacy campaign on that. So is a governmental mechanism here that would ask for polluters to pay more. And this was first mentioned in Rio 1992. So this is a little bit of the resume of it, but we had also the other documents that were published, for example, the Agenda 21 and the Forest Principles that gave guidelines for sustainable and management of conservation of forests. So now we have improved a lot the discussions in nowadays COP. So, okay, so this is the first moment, which leads us to the first COP that was held on Berlin. So the first COP was held on 1995 in Germany, and was the first formal meeting of UNFCCC's member states since the convention was signed in 1992, so 3 years after, during the Rio Summit. And it was signed during the Rio Summit. The COP1 was a critical step into global diplomacy, setting the stage for future climate agreements. So the first document that was published at COPs was the Berlin Mandate that recognized that current commitments of development countries under the UNFCCC were insufficient to effectively combat climate change. So this was a moment of realization that the commitments were insufficient. So we needed at the moment more detailed and more engaged participations to stress this issue. So the Berlin Mandate, it's said to be paved the way for the Kyoto Protocol. So these discussions were the main discussions in the Kyoto Protocol. So if we have insufficient targets and measures and means of implementation, what can we produce in terms of governance that would help this scenery, help this moment? But yeah, that's the way. So it was the sufficient to address climate change was the main thing that paved the path to Kyoto Protocol, and it was the first moment on the negotiations that the expression was came to life. This expression that is the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. That is the principle that stands to this day, because it is really is the main point. For example, the Paris Agreement, we'll talk about it, and it was a really important way of making a sentence. So this was important for the negotiation. And also the Berlin Mandate started the process of legally binding targets on the negotiation. They were not only voluntary targets, they were legally binding. Once countries came back for its country and approved this on its governance. For example, here in Brazil, we approved the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol on the legislative chambers, so with the deputies and the senators. So it depends on each country how this legally binding term will be addressed internally. So, okay, so the first COP on Berlin. we'll jump to the Kyoto conference that had its main discussion focused on paving a path for addressing this issue that we talked before of insufficient climate goals and means of implementation. So the Kyoto Protocol, it had a specific structure that was interesting at the time, but it became obsolete with time as the time was passing. So we had at first moment a quantified emission limitation, and it was only addressed to industrialized countries. So we have here the principle of different but common but different, as we were saying here, common but differentiated responsibilities. And we see here, we see here in the opposition between industrialized versus developing countries. So industrialized countries would have quantified emission limitation, while developed countries would not. This was interesting at the time because it assumed the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, but industrialized countries such as United States, China, and Canada, they were not really happy with that because it only set targets to them and not to the other emerging economies. So this was a main point on the discussion that was the argument for United States leaving the Kyoto Protocol Agreement. So that's what mainly the Paris Agreement tried to change, to see if we could have more of these big industrialized countries being part of the convention. So I'm already getting ahead of myself, but this was a discussion here at Kyoto Protocol, so the differentiating between industrialized and developing or emerging economies. And we had the first legally binding targets with 37 industrialized countries plus the European Union. And we had the first time the means of implementation being discussed. So market-based mechanism, the first one being emissions trading, the carbon market. So we'll be talking a lot about carbon markets when we talk about the Paris Agreement. As you already saw in my previous slide, the 6.4 amendment of the Paris Agreement, the sixth article, the fourth paragraph, it talks about this carbon market as a means of implementation and reducing emissions. And we have also other mechanisms such as clean development mechanism and the joint implementation that are non-market mechanism of implementation. So this is important as well. Many countries, they tend to argumentate that not only market mechanisms should be important, but non-market mechanisms should always have its first spot on the negotiation, because market mechanisms should be only extra way of addressing emissions and offsetting emissions, not the main focus. So the Kyoto Protocol also did not shared any new commitments for developing countries. So this was like a blank space in the Kyoto Protocol. And it had, as I was explaining here, some challenges and limitations. For example, this of differentiating industrialized and non-industrialized and only setting targets for the industrialized countries, not for others, emerging economies. So here is the interface of the UNFCCC Kyoto Protocol website that is available on the site, and it's called the historical page because the layout and the design it's from its time. So really interesting if you want to surf this website and to surf a little bit on the historical websites of the UNFCCC is really cool and interesting. So I share this with you. And we have the same face of any other UNFCCCs or UN in general decisions. We have this layout and this design of the Kyoto Protocol that was dated on 1997 and still is the same to this day. So this is the Kyoto Protocol. There are many other things that I could talk with you guys, but I'll be brief here because we have to talk about the Paris Agreement. So let's keep on. So the Paris Agreement, I will be talking the next few slides with more detailed information and with more diving into each article for us to agree on which are the main topics in discussion, so we can address the topics, and the next workshop will be only talking about the main topics and not about structure, governance, etc. So this is a part of information about what is being discussed, what was discussed, what time we are in the negotiations right now. So if you guys go to Azerbaijan this year or come here to Brazil the year after, you'll be really informed on what the discussions are. So we have another moment for comments. I'll be seeing here the chat and the questions if you have any. Okay, so I'll go on because this part's history. I don't think will be that much of questions or doubts. So let's go to the Paris Agreement. I'll share with you a small video that will introduce us to the Paris Agreement so we can be detailed on which article says what. Okay, everyone ready?
What is the Paris Agreement? The Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change to limit global warming to well below 2, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. This requires economic and social transformation to face the climate challenges now and moving into the future based on the best available science. The Paris Agreement works on a 5-year cycle of increasingly ambitious climate action. By 2020, countries communicate their plans known as nationally determined contributions. Countries communicate actions they will take to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in order to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. Countries also communicate actions they will take to build resilience to adapt to the impacts of rising temperatures. This may include information on adaptation and finance flows. The Paris Agreement also provides a framework for financial, technical, and capacity building support to those countries who need it. Starting in 2024, countries report transparently on actions taken. Collective progress under the Paris Agreement will be assessed through a global stocktake. This will lead to recommendations for countries to set more ambitious plans in the next round.
So just a really quick video just to give the scenery of set the stage for our discussion on Paris Agreement. So, oops, next slide. So just an overview, just to remind ourselves the main parts of the Paris Agreement. We have the quote, the most famous quote of the Paris Agreement, that is to maintain the world's temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius with efforts to limit in 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. So this is the main goal of the Paris Agreement that was introduced by the science. So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it has the main discussions on climate, and its projections said that we would have two different Earths on if we maintain the 1.5 and if we maintain only the 2 degrees Celsius. So there is a huge difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees, and this must be addressed in the commitments on COP and the commitments made by countries on its NDCs, their nationally determined contributions. We'll be talking about it briefly. So this is the most famous quote, but we also have the second most famous quote on the Paris Agreement that you guys are already used to it. We already talked about this today. So we have the principle of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances. So these are the two main quotes and main sentences of the Paris Agreement that will lead us to more detailed and more radical definitions of the agreement. So we'll dive into some articles. Don't feel pressure to memorize which article says what. This is just for us to pass through the main topics of discussion. So when you'll be at COP, as I was saying, you'll see in the television, CMA is talking about the Article 6. So you'll know what the Article 6 means. But don't feel pressure to memorize anything. It's just for us to keep to build this vocabulary and to build this knowledge on what is being discussed at COPs, or here in the case in the Paris Agreement. So we'll dive into articles 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 14. It will be brief, don't worry. So let's go. So the first article of the Paris Agreement, it's only about its definition. So what is the convention? What is the Conference of the Parties? What is a party? What are non-party stakeholders, observer organizations, for example? So the Article 1 is just naming the main actors at the Paris Agreement. So the CMA and the COP. So nothing else to see here. It's a really straightforward article. This second article, you will be talking about the aims to straighten the global response to the threat of climate change, the ability to adapt to adverse impacts of climate change, the finance flows towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development, and the need to reflect equity and the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. So the Article 2 will set the main goals. So we'll set the two most famous codes that we saw in the previous slide. They are based here in Article 2. So the Article 2 will set the tone, will set the goals, and we'll talk about what are the main concerns on the Paris Agreement. So the first article of the first paragraph, sorry, of the second article says that holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius. So it's setting the tone here, above pre-industrial levels, and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, recognizing that this would significantly reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. So here is the main goal of the Paris Agreement. So it also reaches for, the Article 2 also reach for the adaptation discussion. So it says the parties should have to increase the ability to adapt to adverse impacts of climate change and foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emissions development in a manner that does not threaten food production, security, and diversity. Making finance flows consistent with the pathways towards low greenhouse emissions and climate resilient development. So this, in Article 2, there are the main topics of discussion. So adaptation, mitigation, means of implementation, setting the goal of 1.5, and addressing the needs of equity. So the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. So the Article 2 is really important to getting to know the Paris Agreement. But let's move on. Article 3. The Article 3 is just this. So I share with you guys. It's just this one code that is as nationally determined contributions. So the Article 3 is it's telling us what are nationally determined contributions. So what are they? Let's see. As nationally determined contributions to the global response to climate change, all parties are to undertake and communicate ambitious effort, as defined in articles blah, 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 with the view to achieving the purpose of this agreement as set out in Article 2. So Article 2 is the purpose of the Paris Agreement. The efforts of all parties will represent a progression over time while recognizing the need to support developing countries' parties for the effective implementation of this agreement. So here we have more like a methodology article of the COP. So how parties will align with Article 2 that set the tone. So they'll have to share, in every 5 years, we'll see this in the article, their nationally determined contributions. So they have to look inside, look to its own country and see, well, that's my reality. How is my economy emitting a greenhouse gas? How can I adapt? What are the main risks that my country has on climate change? How can I implement this? Do I have any national means of implementation? Will I be needing to access funds, to access finance of other mechanisms placed at COP, placed at the UNFCCC? This is some questions that the Article 3 brings to us. Marina, do you want to say something? Sorry.
Oh, just unmuted. Sorry.
No, no problem. If you want to participate, you'll be gladly invited. Okay. So let's move on. So here we have the definition of the NDC as the main methodology of communicating countries' efforts towards a low carbon footprint or towards offsetting carbon emissions to 2050. But we'll talk about this a little bit more. So if you are not familiar with the term NDC already, here's the definition: the nationally determined contributions, and its sentence is self-explanatory. So each country defines its own goals and its own ways of implementation and the tools they will be needing for that, mechanisms, and if they want the UNFCCC's support on anything, being starting on finance and ending on technology transfer, for example. So let's go to the Article 4. The Article 4 is one of the most important articles of the Paris Agreement, so I'll be calling attention to the Article 4 and the Article 6. If you are going to copy, you'll see that both Articles 4 and 6 will be the most mentioned and the most discussed topics on the COP. So Article 4, let's go. So it is going to detail what is an NDC and what it aims. So for example, we have here in the Article 4 the stress that global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions should be as soon as possible. So the highest ever emission point on the graphic should be now, or should already have been, because from now on we have to decrease this graphic of emissions a lot in order to achieve the goals of 2030, 2035, and later on the net zero by 2050. So the Article 4 stands for the global peaking of the greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible, and the need for each country, member of the UNFCCC or member of the convention, to communicate successive NDCs every 5 years. So in Brazil now I am working with the Environment and Climate Change Ministry on defining the goals of the NDC for 2035 and how the Brazil actually will be implementing tools and mechanisms to reach net zero by 2050. So we are working here with the government to establish the climate plan that will substitute the last climate plans that were already obsolete, because we had to apply, for example, if the Paris Agreement was decided in 2015, by 2020, every country should communicate a new NDC because it had already passed 5 years. Next year at COP in Belém, we'll have to address a new round of NDCs because we have 5 more years. The COP in Belém will also be interesting because it will be the date of 10 years of the Paris Agreement. So it will be a really important moment for assessing the NDC's commitments and seeing if we have, how much have we traveled this 10 years, how much have we improved our governance on climate change, our mechanisms, our tools, and this is important aspect of Paris Agreement, communicating each 5 years. NDCs shall present a progression, so each NDC shall have more ambitious commitments than the previous one. So with the highest possible ambition, again, they call attention for the different but common responsibilities, and the discussion of common timeframes is a discussion that is present in every COP, because we have to have like a common base and decide a time frame for compare NDCs. Otherwise, we'll be talking about in different methodological structures, and we'll be not able to compare if our NDCs are paving the same path, they have the same routes. So this is a really important discussions, and it was the last point that was discussed that resulted in the conclusion of the Paris Agreement rulebook that, if I'm not mistaken, was also at Glasgow, the closing of the Paris rulebook. So you can see, for example, we have to have 6 years to define the rulebook. So the time of climate change and the time of diplomacy and negotiation, they must align even more, because otherwise we'll be left behind. And other important part of the Article 4 is the mention of the need for environmental integrity, transparency, accuracy, completeness, comparability, and consistency. So these are the focus that each NDC must have. And here I share with you the first article, the first paragraph of Article 4. That is that parties aim to reach global peaking of greenhouse emissions as soon as possible, and to undertake rapid reductions thereafter in accordance with the best available science, so as to achieve the balance between anthropogenic emissions by sources and removals by sinks of greenhouse gases in the second half of the century. I'll be not entering in this part of the discussion, the removal by sinks of greenhouse gas emissions. It is a discussion that we can talk years and years about it. It's a really interesting topic. I'm really fond of this topic, even more because Brazil has a really different NDC compared to industrialized countries. So the sinks of greenhouse gas emissions is a very interesting point, and it has really it has a point of connection with human rights, indigenous, quilombolas, traditional peoples' rights and demands. So this is a really great topic. I think we might discuss it even more on Wednesday. So be here at Wednesday as well. So let's move on. Now we go to the Article 6. The Article 5 I did not put on the slide because otherwise it will take us so much time. But Article 5 is really interesting if you have an NGO that is more prone to discuss forest conservation, ecosystems, etc. I really encourage you to search for the Article 5 that says about sinks and reservoirs of greenhouse gases emissions. So feel free to search for it, but I'll not be entering this topic here. So Article 6, I'm already finishing, so I'll not be taking so much time anymore. And the article, so we can talk more freely and have questions and have a discussion. Article 6, here we'll be talking about mitigation mechanisms such as the market and non-market approaches. So it is really important because it is a way of addressing and offsetting emissions that would help countries with industries, transport, energy, and the most difficult sectors, economic sectors, to abate emissions from. So this is the discussion about permissions of emitting and offsetting carbon footprint. So what is this balance? How countries should do it? For example, the rulebook, and that I said in the previous slide, it has a huge discussion on the 6th article, on the 6.4, that is here. I'll read for you the 6.4 article, that is the main one. And you saw that we have also a constituted body on the 6.4 because we can't reach a consensus on this. but the 6.4, it is a mechanism to contribute to the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions and support sustainable development as hereby established under the Authority of Guidance Conference of Parties, blah, 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 on a voluntary basis. So the markets here that are being discussed are voluntary markets on carbon emissions, offsetting emissions. So we have a huge discussion on double counting. So is it possible for example, private enterprises make carbon projects on lands with collective use, for example? That's a great question. Doesn't this threatens the sovereignty of national states, of the governments, of the populations itself? Isn't it a way of monetizing and making differentiations between different communities, for example? Those are all discussions that are being held on the Article 6. So how to implement these markets in a way that is healthy, not only for health, but healthy for the social movements and the governance itself of the Paris Agreement. So this is a really important topic, even more when we talk about non-market approaches, that parties may recognize the importance of integrated, holistic, and balanced non-market approaches being available to parties to assist the implementation of the nationally determined contributions in the context of sustainable development and poverty eradication in a coordinated and effective manner, including through mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. So these are all options of non-market approaches of the offsetting carbon emissions. So let's go on. Article 7, really simple. We have this, Article 7 is talking about not really simple, but it's easier to discuss because everyone is more prone to observe and everyone can understand the impacts of climate change, because we see on our day-to-day life. Last Friday here in São Paulo, we had like a huge wind. It was the strongest wind ever accounted for. And this year here in Brazil, we only see extreme weather, extreme events. So this is really clear for everyone that it's more open to this discussion that climate change is a reality and we are seeing in our day-to-day life. So the adaptation and the need for adaptation, the need for adapting infrastructure from gray to green, as we say, so with nature-based solutions, nature-based climate solutions, for example, it is a really important thing of the global goal on adaptation. So here in Article 4, parties hereby establish the global goal on adaptation of enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change, with a view to contributing to sustainable development and ensuring the adequate adaptation response in the context of the temperature goal referred in Article 2. So this is a set of principles for the global goal adaptation that aims to recognize that adaptation is a global challenge and it's faced by all local and subnational components. It also has a key component to protect people, livelihood, ecosystems, and to tackle urgent and immediate needs. So parties recognize that. Article 8 will be an add to Article 7, actually, that it is talking about parties recognizing that the current need for adaptation is significant and that greater levels of mitigation can reduce the need for additional adaptation efforts, and that greater adaptation needs can involve greater adaptation costs. So in Article 8, we see the alliance between adaptation and mitigation, and we see that mitigation can be formed to prevent further adaptation issues. So the importance of mitigation to prevent disasters, to prevent extreme weather, so we can not accumulate more greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, which will cause adaptation issues. Article 9 is the last one. We'll talk about finance and scaling up. So as we said, we have financing and finance funds to the three main topics of the Paris Agreement. So adaptation, mitigation, and means of implementation. Also technology transfer as well, but it's least important, this mathematics and this equation. So we had a promise in 2015 that by 2020, countries and developing economies would have access to a fund of more than $100 billion annually to prevent extreme weather. But this promise was not delivered in 2020, nor in 2021, and it wasn't delivered by this day. So now at COP 2029 in Baku, we'll have a discussion of the new collective quantified goal on adaptation, because all the efforts on sharing this fund were not successful till this moment. So the need for finance to adaptate to extreme weather is really important. Also, it is important to address loss and damage. That is a really important topic of discussion. So remember this word. Loss and damage will be everywhere you can see, and even more when we discuss the needs for financial aid in developing countries by industrialized and also developed countries. So finance, the discussion of finance is the same as the ambition. It needs to progressively scale up. So with more commitments, with more commitments of industrialized countries to help emerging economies and countries that are more geographically vulnerable to climate change, being islands or coastal countries or countries with dry lands and landscapes that are not so filled with water. We have many extreme events examples, so countries should be prepared and communicate in their NDCs if they need additional finance flows to achieve mitigation, adaptation, means of implementation, or technology transfer. We have to have here in Article 9 a balance between mitigation and adaptation, and with technology transfer and finance transfer, we also need to access, to take stock, and to be transparent with how we spend this money. And just for us to, to share with you a piece of the article, so developed countries parties shall provide financial resources to assist developing countries parties with respect to both mitigation and adaptation in continuation of their existing obligations under the convention. So this is called for multilateral and bilateral partnership between countries in the UNFCCC. We'll talk about the 14th article, the global stocktake, the day after tomorrow when we talk about negotiations, because the global stocktake was the main decision in the last COP, Dubai COP. So I will be talking about the 14th article that talks about the global stocktake, the transparency, the assessing, the monitoring of the NDCs, and how can we go from now on in the next workshop. So this was what I had to share. I think I was a little bit after time, so I'm sorry for that. If you want to share some question and answers, we have this, but you can also put on here on the chat, on the question and answer on the Zoom. I'll be gladly talking to you for more minutes if you want to. And we have here the second workshop agenda. You can, in the same QR code, you can vote for which topic do you think it's more interesting, so I can place more attention on the topic that you want to know more about. So the next workshop will have the discussion of social participation and activism, examples and case studies of successful activism programs. And we also go through the key negotiation items over the years, being that climate finance, adaptation, and mitigation. So all topics that we introduced today. So I think on Wednesday, we'll be more prepared to dive in the negotiations and diving on the modes of participation of COP And I hope this helped you guys in a way to understand the key and the main topics of the Paris Agreement. So we'll keep discussing this on
Marina,
Wednesday.
we still have some time left. I sent you directly on the chat some questions that people kept posting questions while you were speaking. So maybe you could not see them because you were with your screen open with the presentation there. So I sent you directly a few questions we had on the chat.
Perfect. Now I can see it.
Yes, Rosanna, we'll share the recordings and the presentations with you very soon.
So I don't know which was the first question, Marina, if you could help me here.
If they are, so let me open here. They're in the order
It's
that people
Timothy.
shared on the chat. So can I read the questions for you, perhaps one by one? Yes, okay, so Marcelo Alonso asked if a museum, in which category would a museum fit to participate at COP? That is
Sorry, which
possible.
one?
Museum,
Museum?
is it possible to participate? I'll
As a
copy her
museum?
question. Yes.
I think so. It depends on how you define yourself. For example, if you're a museum, you have educational programs, you have other types of activities that include socialization, human rights, access to the reservoirs of the museum. So I think so. It depends on how you define yourself and on which constituency do you think it feels you best. It fits you best. For example, if you're a museum that dialogues with I don't know, environmentalism or biodiversity or climate change, of course there are topics that have total synergy with the COP structure. So it depends, I think.
We have another question. So kindly advise where an organization working towards advancing economic opportunities for youth related to climate change would fit in.
If you are talking about youth or children, I think the best category would be the young goal, the young and children, youth and children NGO. But of course, youth and children, they discuss much more vast and broad topics than only youth and children. So finance is a topic that it's also really, really movemented and used by youth and children movements. So it is as also an argument that children and youth can talk about difficult things. They can talk about finance as equals to people from adults of the negotiation. So any topic that youth or children want to talk about will be interesting and will be categorized in the observer organization of young goal, even though you want to talk about finance, for example.
Thank you. There's another question from Timothy about the transport system. I'm not sure we can address, but I'm going to read it to check if Marina can share something about it. While it is good to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, however, why is it very important we all go to COP29? Example, do we consider the amount of CO2 we are going to emit in the transport process? I think it's more of a reflection than a question.
This is a reflection that every year it appears because it is really strange that everyone has to go to the COP by plane, and there are lots of memes about it, like world leaders going by plane to discuss climate change in private planes. So it is kind of funny, even though it's sad at the same time. But it is a good discussion. These emissions, they will be accounted for on the transport sector of each country. So I don't know if it's like relevant in terms in macro terms of emissions, because I don't know, the gross part of the emissions, they're concerned on energy and on fossil fuels, and some like leader transport by plane is not relevant to amplify that much the transport emission sector of each country, but it's a good reflection. For example, now COP has ways of participating remotely. You can either watch the sessions or you can participate remotely, but of course, every event, the more interesting part of the event is being there and build networks and get to know people and exchange from different points of views, different perspectives. So yeah, that's a good question and a good thing to think about it.
Another one from Cladus, I think it was answered already, but can one participate in the forthcoming UNFCCC Climate Change Summit without having accredited as an observer?
Yeah, I think we talk about it in the other question and answer, but yes, you can, but you have to ask for other observer organizations to share credential with you. So it's easier most of the times for you to be an observer if you have like mobilizing partners and you want to go with many people, but you as an individual, you can reach for and ask for observer organizations to give you an credential, but it will depend on how this organization is organizing its credentials. As I said, for my previous organization, we only shared credentials with people that were with us for the whole year. So there were in the projects, in the movements, etc. So it might be a little hard for you to convince any observer organization to handling to you credential.
And there was one last question that we didn't answer from Paswell. Do we have country level support structures to help in accreditation?
It depends on the country. If I understand the question well, it depends on the country. For example, Brazil, the national government is giving credentials to different people and different organizations, but this is more like a national thing. I don't know if other countries do the same, but for example, last year I did not got accredited by the NGO that I used to work with. I got accredited by the federal government with the Ministry of International Relations, because they saw a communique that said that everyone who intended to go to COP should fill the survey. I filled the survey and I was contemplated by a credential. So it depends on the country. Like Brazil has this policy of amplifying voices and amplifying modes of participation. So you don't have to be observer organization to have a credential and to ask for the country to help you with getting accredited. But I don't know if it works in other countries. This was a civil society demand. So that's already a cool result of advocacy here in Brazil.
Sorry, there was a question I didn't read. So Gustavo is sharing with me. I think it's from Juan. Why Canada and others reject the Kyoto Protocol?
What reject?
Why Canada and other countries, I think, when he said others, rejected the Kyoto Protocol?
Because it only set targets for industrialized countries. In Canada, United States, they thought this was unfair, because even though developing countries were developing, they had emissions as well, and they should be accounted for. So this was the main argument why this huge emission countries such as United States and Canada were not pleased with the Kyoto Protocol, because you only set targets for industrialized countries. And that's it. They were feeling a bit unjust.
And it seems there was another one in regards of these many articles of Paris Agreement. Which of these are still under negotiation?
Perfect. Almost all of them that I brought here. The one is not, because the one is only definitions, but the two is under constant discussion. For example, if we would have a resilient climate at 2 degrees or 1.5. If IPCC will advocate for the 1.5, but there are other scientific institutions that will argument with 2 degrees and later on becoming 1.5. So the Article 2 is still on negotiation. The Article 4 that I was saying about the NDCs, it's on constant negotiation as well, because they can't decide which is the most important way of sharing information of the country. For example, Brazil, it has its own problem of limiting the timeline, the time date for emissions. So inside Brazil, we cannot reach a consensus on the time. And we take this doubt on the discussion internationally. So the time frames, the common time frames, they are also under discussion, even though the rule book has a suggestion, but most countries are not ready to adopt the suggestions. So the time frame is still a question. The 5 in 5 years appliance of the NDC is still a question. There are many countries that do not apply the NDC. We also have discussions about the ambition, how NDCs must be always more ambitious than the previous one. So sorry for giving only Brazil examples, that is more fresh in my mind. But for example, here in Brazil, we had 3 NDCs that they were not more ambitious than the first one. So this was called like the movement of unjust reporting to the UNFCCC. We were called attention because our NDCs do not feel in this method. So for example, this is for me to say that Article 4 is still under discussion. As I said, Article 6 is under discussion as well. They cannot decide which is the main mechanism for regulatory carbon markets on other finance mechanisms to address offsetting emissions by 2050. So this is still a question. And the market and non-market approaches, they're always in discussion. As I said, the Article 5 that talks about sinks and reservoirs of greenhouse gas emissions, they are always in discussion because, for example, if you have a carbon market to offset carbon footprints, you need sinks and reservoirs to remove those types of emissions. So one article is connected to the other. If the Article 6 of carbon markets is not well developed, you have to come back to Article 5, for example, for sinks and reservoirs. So they're all in discussions at the same time. The fund for loss and damage, the adaptation goal is always changing as well. The value of the fund, the amount of money that they have, or how will they distribute. For example, Brazil, even though we are a developing economy, we don't want to be part of the receiving parties of the fund, because we don't think we need this money, because there are other countries with more vulnerable situations that could be best regarded with this money than us, for example. So there are these discussions: which countries pay for the fund, which countries receive the fund, how can you apply, what are the principal KPIs for receiving and for assessing later on. So there is a lot to discuss. That's why we have this sentiment, we have this feeling that the COPs, they don't go forward, etc., is because they are really tough to coming into an agreement. So that's the problem.
Thanks, Marina. Maybe I could just add on one of the questions around accreditation and credentials, just to clarify something that Marina shared with us. And sometimes the language can be a bit confusing. is that, so to become accredited as an observer is one process, which Marina mentioned. You have to have 3 years or so of experience, and then you go through a process to become accredited as an observer. Once you are, then you can get access to your own badges or credentials. Sometimes we call them credentials, badges, passes, and we use different words for the same thing, which is an access pass, a credential to attend, online or in person. And if you are not accredited, because that process is quite long and sometimes can be difficult, as a number of people mentioned in the chat, then you can still access a badge or a credential through another organization or a government. But as Marina mentioned, you are reliant on them wanting to give you that badge or that credential. But if you do want to embark on the process to become accredited as an NGO observer and then get your own badges, that is a process that the UNFCCC Secretariat is trying to prioritize Global South observers, because at the moment, most of the organizations who have NGO accreditation, the biggest percentage are from industrialized countries. That's just natural about the history of the UNFCCC. So there is a recognition that there maybe should be more effort to include NGO observers from other regions, but unfortunately the process is still challenging. But if you, I think it's still worth pursuing if you are looking for that long term. And then there is going to be online participation at this COP. But up until recently, it wasn't clear if it would be available because the UNFCCC has had some budget cuts. So that has also, in some cases, limited online participation, like at the SBs, online participation wasn't an option in the middle of the year. It's maybe just the constraints of choosing between online or in-person engagement. It would be great to save on all the carbon emissions and not go to COP. But there are still only very limited opportunities to do that. And you miss out on some of the other ways to engage. Thanks. I hope that just maybe clarified the difference. Yeah, thanks.
So since we have, let me see if we have other questions. So there was just a comment, I think, from Sifalto Nana. So even if the people do not go to COP, they could still make their voices heard by negotiators. It's another comment here on the chat. So I think we can conclude. Charlotte, there are no other questions here for Marina.
Great. Yes, and maybe next session we will also have some more time to talk about what can be achieved in attending in person, and I think the other avenues may be open to having your voices heard in those spaces. So thank you. Thanks so much, Safia, too, for that comment. Okay, if there are no more questions in the chat, then it is just for me to say thank you so much to Marina Naves, Marina Esteves, and Gustavo for hosting us, for presenting such a really comprehensive introduction to the UNFCCC process and structure. We will be following up with each of you who registered for this event with some really detailed information, lots of resources that we can share with you with some more information, other webinars we've run in the past, guidance that we have, the resources that we used to produce this session, that will all be coming to you over email. We'll also be sharing this recording, so you will get that and the resources that we have to share. Please do join us next session, which will be on Wednesday at the same time, where we'll get into some more details on how to have your voice heard in the space. And that is it. Just one more thing is to say thank you so much to our team behind the scenes who have been helping with meeting support, and our amazing interpreters who have been helping us to be understood across multiple languages. Otherwise, thank you very much, and we will see you again on Wednesday. Thank you.
Well, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye.